Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Mike Morris. I'm at the University of Notre Dame, and we'd like to welcome you to the first webinar by the Global Partnership for Poverty and Entrepreneurship. Our format today is I will provide a brief introduction to the topic, where our focus, of course, is Do the Ventures of the Poor Matter? And then we'll move into a panel discussion, and I'll introduce our panelists. I would like to ask anybody in the audience that has questions to please post your questions in the chat as we go, and I will try to integrate those questions into the conversation on an ongoing basis. Let me begin, though, with some table setting in terms of some of the issues and some of what we're dealing with. The reality of poverty is that it's a pressing global problem, a salient one that doesn't go away. 22% of the world's population is in poverty today. In developed countries like the US, the number is around 13%. 10% of the world lives in extreme poverty. For every 1,000 children born, 39 will die before they're 5 years old. A third of the urban population in the world lives in a slum. And while we've seen some progress over the last 30 years, the COVID pandemic has actually reversed that progress around the globe. We're doing things to help the poor, but we're not doing enough to get them out of poverty. Governments around the world spend trillions of dollars each year. Global spending per capita has increased in most every year for over 50 years, and yet the poverty rate remains unacceptably high. We've seen some progress in the developing world, but that's principally come in two countries, China and India. Meanwhile, the gap between haves and haves not continues to grow. The question on the table is entrepreneurship part of the toolkit? Is it part of the solution? Can we make a dent in poverty? Poverty, of course, is a multidimensional phenomenon that transcends income or money and includes chronic health problems, food scarcity, lack of transportation, limited social networks, a host of other kind of issues. If we translate that into what does it mean when somebody in poverty tries to start a venture, we all know as entrepreneurship scholars and practitioners that all entrepreneurs face the so-called liabilities of newness and smallness, but the poor face an additional liability that we label the liability of poorness. It includes the challenges in starting a business when you suffer from serious literacy gaps, not just functional literacy, but financial literacy, technological literacy, economic literacy. It includes a scarcity mindset in terms of a very short-term orientation. It includes the lack of a safety net. And if I'm trying to start in business in poverty and I'm a single mom with 5 kids, I face intense non-business pressures, whether that is the threat of losing my housing or whether that's chronic health problems and no health insurance. This liability of poorness has huge implications for the kinds of ventures started by the poor, for the opportunities they're able to perceive or their opportunity horizons, for their ability to adopt an entrepreneurial mindset, for the time they have to spend on their ventures, their ability to plan as opposed to live in the moment, their ability to think strategically, the kind of markets that they tend to enter, the resources they're able to employ, and the returns they're able to generate. In our own work, we have drawn a distinction between survival, lifestyle, managed growth, and aggressive growth types of ventures started by the poor. We know in general that about 85% of all startups are survival and lifestyle ventures. but for the poor, it's closer to 100%. So they disproportionately start survival and lifestyle ventures. And these ventures, in turn, frequently suffer from what we call the commodity trap. They have higher unit costs, their prices are too low, their margins are too small, they're buying at retail to sell at retail, they have no bargaining power with suppliers, they are labor-intensive businesses where the entrepreneur is providing most of the labor. They struggle to differentiate themselves, they face intense competition, which can marginalize the ventures. So do these ventures matter? There are those who argue that, and published research that argues that these ventures are unproductive, they're inefficient, they should not be receiving support, certainly not government support. The counter argument is these ventures address market niches that are otherwise ignored by incumbent firms. They enhance competition. They get to the point where they pay taxes, they stabilize neighborhoods, they tend to be immersed in the fabric of their communities. They also provide a huge role in human capital development in terms of the developmental experience, the skills, the knowledge base, the enhanced self-efficacy for the entrepreneurs behind these ventures. And they play an integral role in the larger portfolio of new ventures that get created. The evidence, unfortunately, the data with regard to the poor and entrepreneurship is quite limited and often anecdotal. But there is some evidence. One of our panelists has published important work that shows both in developed and developing countries that higher levels of entrepreneurship are associated with greater reductions in poverty. Nements and Zhuang found similar evidence looking at agricultural entrepreneurship in China. Masango and Ogenti, the efforts of women entrepreneurs in Kenya have a positive impact on poverty reduction. In the US, Slavensky has found that the states with the highest rates of entrepreneurship among the poor demonstrated the largest reductions in poverty over a 6-year time period. The Aspen Institute, following 133 extremely poor micro entrepreneurs for 5 years, found that 72% of them increased household income over $8,000, and over half of them moved out of poverty. Is there a downside? Certainly, entrepreneurship failure rates can be high, and for the individual in poverty, they lose everything they have. For others are the marginal returns that they generate marginal returns for tremendous effort and might make more in a job. These entrepreneurs can experience high levels of stress, fatigue, a sense of overwhelmingness. The time demands can take away from family and personal life. There are many around them that may be frustrated because the entrepreneur tries to put money into the business when they want the money to come to the family or to the community. They get burnt out. Self-efficacy and depression may result from failure. It can undermine relationships and friendships because I'm trying to get help with the business, support. And when these businesses fail, the debt burden can result in blacklisting from unpaid obligations. But on the positive side, we can see multiple dimensions of quality of life can be positively impacted by entrepreneurship by the poor. So whether that's income generation or wealth accumulation or control over one's economic well-being, whether that's one's ability to build one's network and more participate in the community and in the political world, the ability to give back to one's community, to leverage cultural assets. So a large number of benefits on the plus side. And then there are a lot of variables that sort of decide what the outcome will be, whether it's the ability to adopt the entrepreneurial mindset, the kind of mentoring or role models one has, the kind of ecosystem availability or lack of availability. So it is with this platform that we'd like to explore this question do the ventures of the poor matter? I'd like to introduce our three panelists. Dr. Julia Rouse is the co-head of the Sylvia Pankhurst Gender Research Center at Manchester Metropolitan University's Faculty of Business and Law in the UK. She led the establishment of a wider group, the Decent Work and Productivity Research Center, or the Sylvia. Equality and mobility are central concerns of Julia in terms of her research, which has focused on low-paid self-employment and women's enterprise, how welfare systems and micro-enterprise programs can shape decent self-employment, workplace maternity management, particularly in small firms. She's also writing and publishing about a critical realist conception of entrepreneurship. And with her colleagues, she's formed the Generating Routes for Women's Leadership Project, GROWL, it's an interesting acronym, that summarizes evidence on barriers that block women's progression and explain gender inequalities. Dr. Jose Ernesto Amoros Espinoza is an expert in entrepreneurship and new business development. He currently is the director of doctoral programs and co-head of the Entrepreneurship and Leadership Strategic Research Group at the IGAD Business School of the Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico. Dr. Amoros has published more than 40 scholarly articles and 30 monographs on entrepreneurship, poverty, and entrepreneurial dynamics. He's the associate editor of the Journal of Business Venturing Insights and the International Entrepreneurship and Management Journal. Jose has been a member of the board of directors of the GEM Global and is part of the research committee for GEM Global, the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. In his work within the GEM project, he's participated in the evaluation of pro-entrepreneurship public policies in countries across the globe. He's the vice president of the Ibero-American Academy of Management. Lavoyo Rani is the CEO and co-founder of Salulu Aluto Technologies. Lavoyo grew up in poverty during the apartheid period in South Africa. He was born in the Eastern Cape. He moved to Cape Town, where he completed his education, became a school teacher. One of the challenges he noted is that many of his fellow school teachers had no computers, and so he began selling computers out of the boot of his car. And that grew into a vision, a dream to bring computer literacy to townships across South Africa, to the poor, to the disadvantaged. And so today, he and his brother run Salulu. They have facilities or operations, over 50 locations across the country. In addition, Lavoyo, in addition to this amazing company that he's built, Lavoyo works extensively with youth in the townships in South Africa to help them launch their own ventures. He's provided structured mentoring and incubation facilities and programs. Lavoyo has been recognized globally as an outstanding young person. I don't think he's that young anymore, but he was recognized with the Schwab Foundation Social Entrepreneur of the Year Award, the National Productivity Award, and an Outstanding Global Entrepreneur Award. So please join me in welcoming this outstanding group of panelists. This extended group of panelists, excuse me.
Thank you.
So let's kick it off. Sort of building on the foundation that I laid, let me open with the question, do you think anybody in poverty is capable of starting a business of some sort? And if not, who amongst the poor is capable, that is capable of trading, capable of trading for a profit, trading and creating some sort of non-financial value? Is it the many or is it the few? Julia, you want to
Okay,
Julia,
so I mean,
Julia, go ahead.
yeah. So what is trading? So for me, trading is the combination of resources into goods and services in the hope of profitable trade. That's always done in a context. And so the simple answer is that people who have the very, very least resources or don't have the ability to combine those resources into goods and services or who live in a context that doesn't enable trade are going to have a very low prospect of being able to trade at profit. I mean, at a scale of profit that makes significant difference and is worth it compared with the risk. Now, I'm only talking here about the financial process, and we might talk about the other benefits in a minute that might come from the entrepreneurial process. So, I mean, this is pretty obvious, isn't it? It depends on how many resources you've got and what kinds of resources. But if I give you extreme example, I've got some colleagues who've done some work on women in refugee camps, where they're actually frightened to leave their children in case their children are trafficked. So their labour is itself extremely constrained. So not only do they lack basic resources, but they lack the ability to freely move around without the fear of sexual violence to them or their children. Then, really, what are their genuine prospects? So, a program that comes in with airy-fairy ideas that this is the route out of poverty, I would say, is pretty misguided in that context, because you've got to deal with underlying problems like that before people have a chance of trade. And there has to be some sort of market as well for whatever it is they're going to create. I mean, COVID has taught us that. You can have as many resources as you like, but if you close down the markets, then what? So, the other side of it is there has to be demand. And we get in this problem of the poor trading with the poor. But so I don't believe that everybody has the potential to find their way out of poverty. There will always be an exceptional person with an exceptional idea. But if we want to talk more about majorities and chances rather than focusing, as I think enterprise programs sometimes do, on the exceptional person who makes it, then I think there are boundary conditions for how people for the ability to climb out of poverty. But I'm also really interested in us developing a good evidence base about who, under what conditions and with what support, can climb out of poverty. That is a great research question that is very underexplored.
Thank you. And it's interesting, your answer focuses less on the individual and more on the context that they find themselves in. Ernesto, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And also for everyone that is attending this fantastic webinar. It's obviously a not easy answer for a very complex question. As Julia, I strongly believe that nobody, independently if you are poor or not, need to be an entrepreneur, okay? This is something that always reinforced in my courses, in webinars, in any place when I have the opportunity to talk, okay? Entrepreneurship is an activity that is not from everyone. So imagine in a context of poverty. So reinforce the idea of Julia, it's very difficult for many people with the lack of resources try to start or move forward something like a kind of entrepreneurial endeavor, okay? But in the other hand, for many people, it's the only way to survive, okay? Even these activities could be considered suboptimal because the context, but inside this context, try to start any kind of business is the only way to make a sort of life, okay? And this is also very relevant to understand. Even if these people don't have the resources, the capacity, financial, social capital, etc., is the only way to move out of these conditions. But obviously, in this process will be a lot of problems, as we will discuss, but the idea behind to start a new business or an entrepreneurial endeavor in the way that we, in our traditional Western paradigms, understand a new business, for many people, could be the last resort, okay? And because many of these people don't have any kind of additional opportunities, they do it, okay? And if we can help these people with some additional resources or trying to make a recombination of them, probably in many cases, even the lack of these capabilities is important for them to help to move forward their entrepreneurial endeavors. But it's not easy, okay? Summarizing, yes, I agree. No many people want to be involved in entrepreneurship, but if you are forced, this is the paradox. This is the paradox.
Loyola, you had a lot of experience, not just with your own venture, but you've seen hundreds of others try to start ventures. What has been your experience?
Just to come back on the Ernesto, saying that, I mean, I've seen it in Africa. I've seen there's a different kind of an energy that is a kind of like coming in now with youth and women, with drives from entrepreneurship on the grassroots level now. So there's a huge drive, and I think it's been driven by necessity. And it's also been driven by the unemployment numbers. I mean, like we're sitting at 67% of unemployment youth. And also it's been driven also from the way country now is seen entrepreneurship as a cool thing, as an in thing, and as something that I want to aspire to be. So you've got many young people now, I mean, like that sees entrepreneur as a way to live and as a way, I mean, to kind of survive. And I get the sense that this, it's not only South Africa, it's kind of like in Africa. I mean, when you go to Kenya, you could see on the street, you could see everywhere, you would see the innovation, and you see the creativity that is coming in now, because poverty forces you to innovate. Poverty forces you to look deeper in terms of what you have, and it forces you to find ways and leverage it, and it forces you to be creative, because you have to survive, and there's nothing, because you don't have any cultural, you don't have any social capital, or you don't have anything now. So I kind of see the drive and the energy, and it's changing that, and I think it's, but the only thing that I kind of see, it's like it's still on a survival mode. It's not growing to an extent that they can scale it or they can create more. It's kind of like one-man jive or five-man. So there's so much energy, but it has to be kind of taken beyond just for survival. It has to be more those innovative ideas to be taken and scale it and create more impact in terms of those solutions.
Thank you. Julia, you had something you wanted to add?
Well, really coming back on both of you, I think the policy dilemma is this, that people are doing it for necessity, of course, and the instinct is to want to help. And then on the other hand, I worry that programs are making hyperbolic claims about what can be achieved sometimes in that process of trying to help. And it goes back to Ernesto's point that almost becoming an entrepreneur becomes compulsory or some sort of moral obligation. And then the idea comes in that if you can't make it, you are deficient. And so we start take the energy away, or the attention away from the context and how the context is creating problems, and far too much onto the creativity of the individual. So whilst we want to foster the creativity of the individual, I think we need to keep a critical eye on the context and what is really feasible in that context. So it's kind of, sometimes our best intentions can trip us up, I think, when we start thinking about this as a policy problem.
So, as I mentioned in the opening, it has been argued that the ventures of the poor tend to be inefficient, tend to be unproductive, tend to create few jobs, generate little in the way of intellectual property. I'm wondering if you think these are valid criticisms. And in the opening, I talked about this commodity trap where these ventures can't be anything more than marginal. Do you agree with this? And does it raise questions about whether the ventures of the poor actually matter?
Yeah, let me take this one. This is very interesting. Obviously, depends with the lens when we are measuring poverty activities, okay? And from a strictly economic point of view, with the very traditional measures around, you know, productivity, value added, value chains, etc. Obviously, many of these activities that in poor context people start to do, like kind of startups or new ventures, are completely unproductive. Okay, but something that we need to consider, it's obviously not the pure economic point of view under this individual lens that is more related with a kind of hedonic function of new venture, okay? If I obtain resources, mainly financial ones, I can do A, B, C, D and have a kind of economic prosperity. That is important, but this is one part of the equation, okay? The other part of the equation is more related with a sense of community, okay? Probably Lobullo can illuminate this part of the discussion, because in my case, in Latin America, working with some communities, more than the pure individualistic financial approach, start a new business, have a sense of community. It's important for the context. It's important for the families. It's important for other additional things out of the traditional pure economic measures, okay? Even some of these ventures could not be measured in the way of financial sustainability in middle long term with the traditional measures, are incredibly important for the society, for the construction of a place, for this context that need people undertaking different type of activities, okay? And this is very important. And in the other hand, one of the problems also Julia mentioned previously that we have mainly in developing countries, but in some developed ones also occur something similar. We evaluate some policies or start some policies related to reduce poverty using pure economic terms. But in the other hand, we use social mechanisms to solve these problems and combine or confuse, more than combine, confuse a pure social policy with economic one. And in the other one, we confuse a pure economic policy with a social one. And these confusions and not the combinations cause a lot of problems, because we are measuring an economic policy for the pure using social criteria. And in reverse, something that is considered more for social approach, use traditional economic measures, and obviously many of these things fail. And this is very evident when we are trying to enhance or design policy for reduce poverty via entrepreneurship in many of our countries, okay?
So Ernesto, you alluded to the concept of place. Could you elaborate on what you mean by that?
Yeah, it is the context. The context is completely relevant, okay? It's not the same try to solve the problem of, I don't know, farmers with agricultural activities. As you mentioned previously, Michael, many of the poor problem is now moving out of the rural areas to the cities, okay? And the cities have a completely different context that if we compare with rural areas, okay? And imagine, and this is also very typical, we try to solve the problem from the rural people in the same way that we want to try to solve the problem of poor people in an urban area. And this is a big mistake, okay? Place, context, these sociotemporal spaces are completely relevant. And in many cases, we miss these details when we try to attack the poverty conditions of these people.
Okay. Lavoio, do these ventures matter from the vantage point of how inefficient they are, how marginal many of them are?
No, I mean, like they matter, and they matter most. I mean, more than any other things, because it's quite important in terms of like I mean, these ventures, these entrepreneurs that are coming in the township that are coming now. What I see, the challenge and working in the ground, it's just like most of the time you're able to bring the solutions for the community, not able to understand from the communities. So it's kind of like you think people are kind of looking for, because I mean, like, we could sit on our comfort air condition and think about the poor and think that it's kind of a solution. So sometimes we tend to miss it with a good intent that, I mean, this is not what the communities are coming in now. So that's one part. And sometimes it kind of come up with the way of like, no, they are poor, they need a service, so we need to give them a free kind of like time, not understanding that the poor, I mean, also they need to commit to, I mean, to make sure that they are partly involved on this. So that's why many initiatives are failing in, because of not understanding, not being part of the poor and be on the ground and understanding in terms of what matters most and how from that. And I think another thing that probably is a bit missed is just like not understanding even the stakeholders who are these ventures that are done so well, to extent that you could work it out to this kind of role modeling that become examples, so we can make sure that your mission that you are kind of in, is embedded in what is working, instead of like establishing, I mean, more things now. So what I'm getting in the sense that it's like it's like it's our way and we are poor and now we're going to give this way, and it's not our way in terms of like the kind of a two-way. So that kind of an approach, it's kind of not working. It's key that any intervention with the local, it has to be a meaning, and it has to be based on trust and based on intent, understanding in terms of what it has to be. So that's kind of where I'm seeing most of the resources have been wasted, based on, and it happens not only from a global, but even local, even from a government point of view, even big businesses, they kind of not getting it exactly what happening with the poor. They kind of like look at numbers, they think they get it, whereas they are not even having an intellect. And the only intellect is like involve the communities, make sure that they're part, and they make sure that they're buy-in, and they're able to contribute, and they will own it. And the entrepreneurs, they end up see the value in that part of the interventions.
Julia, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I've got a few things going through my mind. I mean, the points have been made here that this is about value for who and what kinds of value. So, you know, we need to broaden a much more complex analysis of value. The second one, as people are saying in the chat box, is about time, that there may be more value over time. But on the other hand, we need to be open to the idea that there may be negative pathways. For example, I think sometimes in the UK, young men getting involved in enterprise, it can actually undo their work ethic, their ability to fit into employment, having had a self-employment experience. So, you know, there might be negatives as well as positives, but we need to research pathways. And another thing is that we need to think about, well, what are the underlying causes of that, and not just blame the individuals or abandon the idea, given that a lot of people have got no other choice, and also people do want to have a go at it would seem. So therefore, what are the entrepreneurial ecosystems? Where are we going wrong that this is happening? So, for example, we might well need to create more businesses that are cooperatives or working at scale, or you know, this kind of thing, rather than tiny individual ventures. So, you know, what's the way in which the public sector is buying from these businesses may need to change to create some sort of market for them. So there's a number of things that can happen in the context that can give them better prospects. So I think, and you know, welfare systems, how do they fit into all of this as well is really important. So, you know, sometimes, so when we come along and say these are not productive businesses, these are not growth businesses, sometimes as well, those researchers aren't thinking about jobs. They're thinking about economic growth. And if COVID, again, has taught us anything in the UK, is, my goodness, hang on a minute, these tiny ventures create huge amounts of work. And actually, we would have anarchy on our hands if we didn't value that work. So, we would have a jobless economy kind of thing. We may not think this is the most brilliant form of entrepreneurship, but it creates masses of jobs. People need jobs. So, in other words, we need to ask a much more complex question than I would propose is being asked in those kind of papers.
So I think one of the themes that you alluded to, Julia, was, and I certainly concur, entrepreneurship's not a silver bullet that's going to solve poverty, but it can play a role. I know you believe strongly that context is everything. And so could you talk about what you see as some of the most critical contextual factors that contribute to successful entrepreneurship on the part of those in disadvantaged circumstances?
I don't think context is everything. I think it's how people respond to the context is also important, but I think context is very important. Well, I mean, there's the obvious, availability of financial capital, the availability of skills. And so, I think I often say to people, your education, your basic education system, right up to about 16 is part of your enterprise ecosystem. Possibly beyond 16, the evidence base around beyond 16 starts to get more murky, but up to 16, it's absolutely clear that basic literacy, numeracy, and education are vital to entrepreneurship. So the best thing you could do to improve women's enterprise all over the world is to give girls education, in my view, so you've got to reach back into the system. In terms of women, access to childcare is a really neglected issue in the big debates around entrepreneurship, but it's hugely important. And other elder care systems, as is health, a healthcare system, mental health, housing, these are all, in my view, we should extend our view of the enterprise ecosystem to include these things, because anybody, all of you who are working on the ground knows that these are the everyday barriers that are, as you say, distracting people from being able to get on in enterprise. And yet we talk about it very little in terms of enterprise ecosystems. Social capital obviously is very important in terms of your networks and the resources you can draw out of those networks and who you can be in those networks, and kind of symbolic capital that you can command inside those networks. But I think markets are massively important as well, and we don't talk enough about that. We also don't talk enough about selling. There's plenty of people who can create goods and services, but they can't sell them, partly because there's no market or a weak market or whatever, but also because their skills in selling are very poor. And we don't necessarily train people well in that, I think. I don't know, am I wrong? You guys are out there in the field a bit more than me to tell me, where I'm getting this wrong. But from what I observe in the UK programs, I'm not sure that we sell selling very well. So, yeah, I think we need to think about the entrepreneur's own labour capital. That's not discussed very much in the literature. But it's not, the idea that you can just kind of work your socks off is more available for some people than others. Much more harder if you've got other responsibilities or a disability, or and no access to transport to get your labour out there and get it going. So, and these things aren't just important at startup. Michael, you and I had a conversation about second stage funding. People think that there's a market for their goods and services, and they get out there and they find out that the market's different to how they thought. That's normal, but have they got the resources to pivot? And often I've found in enterprise programs there isn't even any sort of second stage funding to help them to pivot and to go through that learning process to learn about what the market will bear. So yeah,
I've certainly seen the selling thing. I not just selling to customers, but selling to potential distributors, selling to other constituencies. Lavoya, you look like you want to jump in here.
Yeah, no, I mean, I this time I agree 100% today. I think you're spot on and you are correctly in terms of all these points that you have mentioned. But I think I was like kind of coming up with also maybe from a context from Africa point of view, I was saying that the most thing that we don't talk about, I mean, we talk about market access, education, but we don't talk about social capital in terms of the network that we have, the access that we have it, the people that we are surrounding, the conversation that we have it in the table that have it. And most for the poor, they work harder than normal, I mean, entrepreneurs, in the sense that there's so much bureaucracy around them. They must have a business plan, proposal, viability. Whereas with normal entrepreneurs, you know someone who knows someone who knows someone who opens doors for you much more easier. So that gap becomes ongoing now, because if you are an entrepreneur who's from a poor, you are on your own. So which means that you don't have a support system that you have it. Even your family sometimes becomes a problem. Even your communities becomes a challenge for you. So the forces that we are dealing with are higher than the forces. And that has not been looked at in terms of that social capital, that from among the entrepreneurs, the poor, that work together, collaborate, and find a way that comes in. Because it's always been about competing now, because there's more resources that are coming in now, which is like where the mind shift can come in now. Because when it comes to social issues with the poor, they will come in, mobilize it, someone pass away, they will mobilize it, then make sure that things are happening. But when it comes to entrepreneurial and ventures, that becomes like other way around now. So it's kind of a key for me that, I mean, as much as all are important, but I think that's kind of something that it has to not be talked about, but it has to be looked at in terms of how that can, and that can unlock many, in fact, when we realize that together we can be better instead of individual. Because entrepreneurship is more about ventures about individuals, like, I mean, more about egoistic, go. It's not more about seeing how that social capital can be used to change the way the poor are at the moment.
Ernesto?
Yeah, and something that is very interesting in terms of the context in this relationship with the concept of silver bullet, that is very interesting. One of the critical problems that I observe is that we want to push many people to be entrepreneurial, like a potential solution, and force many mechanisms. And this is also valid in terms of some public policies, but from many NGOs or for other kind of organizations. Okay, we want to help these poor people, these poor communities, and we go there and move a lot of resources, public or private, and try to convert these people to be entrepreneurs, because we strongly believe that this is not the unique, but the most efficient solution, okay? And for me, in my particular point of view, and after measuring a lot of these programs and make some research about that, 80% of these initiatives fail because don't consider the contextualization, don't consider what exactly matters for these people. And obviously, because we are just reproducing something that in other conditions could work, okay? The final results, for example, could be that you have hundreds of people doing exactly the same activity. I don't know, selling food on the streets or making handicrafts that nobody buy, as Julia mentioned, okay? So these don't work, okay? These don't work. This is the incorrect way to understand the silver bullet of entrepreneurship to help poverty people, okay? We need to understand pretty well exactly what matters for these people in terms to not only improve their economic life, that is very important, okay? But also, and again, the sense of community, how they can add value, okay? With the lack of other resources like social capital, financial capital, intellectual capital, etc., etc. But this is the recombination of the resources. This is something that we cannot impose to these people, okay? We need to work with them, not over them, okay? And this is something that is very, very important. And from pure academic point of view, this kind of process are very few understand it. Okay, we need to make more research about these embedded mechanisms to help the poor people. Okay, it's not only move resources to them and reproduce traditional way to do business. Somebody here in the chat put something like I don't know, I don't remember something. These common concepts about understanding the customers, okay, or make a business plan or add value. Forget about this. It is relevant, okay? But for these people, okay, the conversation is in other direction, okay? In other direction. It's impossible to just put a traditional, how to create a sustainable business model for the poor, okay? For my personal point of view, this is a wrong conversation, okay? It's more in depth, it's very complex, but we need to understand the contextualization and the relevance for these people in their actual conditions. Could be dynamics, obviously. The situations change, obviously. And the most important thing here, as Julia mentioned, we are proving or are providing to these people that they are very useful for the society and for the economy. Just make them an opportunity to have a decent job, okay? Forget about if they are creating economic value. A decent job is a functioning for human behavior. And this is also very important.
Thank you. Very insightful comments from all of you. There's an interesting question from one of our participants. And I always refer to this as the distinction between sort of a Maoist let 1,000 flowers bloom and a venture capitalist pick the winners approach. And so the question is, as we try to work with low income and disadvantaged entrepreneurs, should we pursue a strategy of let's create environments to uplift them all? Or should we try to pick the higher potential ones and put all our resources into turning those into winners?
Can I come back on that?
Please.
So I think there might be something, I mean, I've thought mostly about the UK and poverty, I'll be honest. And there's something about our democracy whereby people want to have a go at it, right? It's something that people want to have a go at, and it's probably something that society ought to support. But I mean, removing the point of being almost kind of forced or expected into it, which is definitely not on, I think. But I think there's a potential to set this up as a learning experience. But to be extremely honest with the people we're working with about that, I think it would be really wrong if we sit back and go, well, we know from the evidence base that a lot of these businesses won't fail, they won't make a living wage, that we have some vague hopes about better long-term outcomes. We don't have a lot of good evidence about it. We have some instincts about it. But we start people up in business without telling them that. I think that's disingenuous. So if we want to say, listen, let's do something here, which is an experiment for our community that creates the kind of value that Ernesto was talking about. Or if we want to say, come along, let's learn about markets and our own skills and raise our own sense of agency and work together in a good community where we're protected. Even if we fail, we've somehow built some resilience against the negative outcomes of that. To learn something and progress together. Let's set the program up like that. Let's not just set 1,000 businesses off, because I've sat on panels whereby the person comes in, they say nice things to them, they go away, they say all the negative things behind the closed doors, and then they approve the business plan. And the person is taking risks that they had no idea. As far as they were concerned, this prestigious panel has approved their business plan. They therefore think this is a viable business idea, whereas we know that we started another photographer last week and another one the week before and another one the week before, and the market photography has disappeared in any case. So I think we need to treat these people as adults. and say, you know, this is a kind of program that can create this kind of outcome and might create some economic gain. It might create jobs. Do you want to come on this journey with us and sell these programs differently than perhaps, at least in the UK, we are selling them? Good.
Lavoyo?
No, I mean, today, I mean, spot on. I mean, in terms of being real, being authentic, and be honest in any programs. In terms of even if you're experimenting with the program, it's very important to come up front so that people can understand the expectation now. But the question, I mean, that we're asking is kind of very interesting question in the sense that, I mean, I see there's probably from context in terms of like there's so much support for startups. There's so much, I mean, like there's many kind of organizations that are there to geared for startups now. But I mean, I don't see so much in terms of scale up or growing up or next level. I don't see so much in terms of that. I mean, I kind of like saying, I mean, it's there's not much more, even could be a contributing, even many entrepreneurs not to see themselves or ventures to see themselves growing in that, because there's not much more work in taking to a next level around. And we need to do that. We need to take those ventures that do very well because they become example, and then others they inspire to be, and then we create we create a modeling, we create a kind of case studies, we create a model that, I mean, they can emulate. So I think we need that, becomes like part of that, I mean, opens up now the possibilities for many that if same environment, they've done it with limited resources, it gives hope that for me, I can do it because I've seen it through same context where I am, but they've kind of rise above those contexts. So you need those local heroes. You need those kind of like super that becomes a way that brings kind of seeing that even their ventures, they will one day able to make it in that regard. So I mean, as much as you need more, but you need to kind of like to target it, those, and I mean ventures that can be one that become example for the poor.
Well, let me just push back on that a little bit. Certainly you were one of those ventures that scaled and have done brilliantly. And I had the luck and the fortune to get to know you and work with you when you just had a single location. But I wouldn't have predicted what you created. What I'm trying to say is it's easy to say, let's pick the winners and invest more disproportionately in them, but I don't think you can know who the winners are going to be.
No, sure. I mean, I remember the time we met at Stellenbosch, I had an internet cafe, like a spaza shop, smaller enterprise. So with the ESA program intervention and your support for the poor, so as part of the beneficiaries. So you've created an environment to say let's support 16 enterprise. It was 2008 that time. So I only have one center. I didn't have a website. I didn't have a business plan. I didn't have any understanding. It was more for me surviving now. But with your intervention out of the kind of entrepreneurs, I'm able to rise to extend that 13 years back now. So I become an example now for many entrepreneurs that they can look up. And I also give back because you have kind of taken me. And that's what probably the poor are coming in now. Because I know where I come from and I know my responsibility and in terms of I can't succeed alone. I have to pull up. So any program that comes in, it becomes, hence I'm kind of saying that it's important that you see those kind of like, I mean, sparks that you are seeing that are coming in through this, I mean, and invest on those sparks because they kind of multiply instead of like, I mean, you still continue driving, but those sparks becomes, so I'm kind of contextualized in the sense that how it has changed. And that's what you need for mostly in the local heroes that reside in the areas where many ventures are coming.
I love that concept. Look for the sparks and invest in the sparks. Ernesto?
Yeah, no, it's also very interesting. There is some questions, comments, very, very, very relevant in the chat, but it's also related with this idea about how we can really help people that is living in poverty via entrepreneurship. And also I have a one reflection. Entrepreneurship activities could be just a temporary solution for extreme poverty or for some specific situations. I fully agree that if you try to maintain this kind of activities that could be not considered sustainable in middle long term, probably is a double waste, okay? It's a waste of resources and waste of a human being, like a general concept, okay? And could be cause also frustrating because people probably return to the poverty situations. And this is something that we also need to understand. In many cases, we have the one shot, the cross-sectional picture, okay? And it's very, very important, and many of you put in the chat, we need to measure on the time. We need to elaborate better in the middle long-term consequences of all these activities, the positive and the negative ones. It's also a kind of invitation to future research. But at the same time, okay, something that is very relevant for my personal point of view is we cannot believe that isolated actions could solve all the problems for some poverty communities if we don't involve a more complex system that create something that could be works in more integral way. What that means, okay? In one of my research using macro data, okay? But it's a longitudinal one, 11 years of measure entrepreneurship activities in many, many countries, 70 countries, okay? Believe in me, any kind of action that improve, okay, that improve the function of formal institution, that means government that help to improve the societal and economic mechanisms to help entrepreneurs. Any little improvement decrease dramatically the number of people that are involved in necessity-based entrepreneurship, okay? More in developing countries, okay? These results show us that if we want to solve the poverty problem, obviously we need to help, or probably help these people via entrepreneurship, okay? But we don't want that all these people maintain their low value added activities for years, okay? If we can create additional mechanisms, and this is something that somebody put in the chat, entrepreneurship could be an additional help for these people, that this is also very relevant, okay? But me personally, I don't believe that this is a long-term good strategy, okay? Probably because the rule of big numbers, okay? In this huge amount of entrepreneurs that are burning in poverty conditions, some of them could be growth, could be a value added, could be a fantastic ventures. We need to help them. Obviously, we need to help them, okay? But it's not something that we can consider, okay? We need to change the context because nobody wants to be poor, okay? Nobody wants to be poor. This is something that we need to understand. Probably for some philosophical or religious motives, somebody wants to be isolated in the middle of nowhere and be poor by convenience, okay? But nobody wants to be poor, okay? So if we can help these people to solve short-term problems, and again, understand what will be matter for middle and long-term, go ahead, okay? And this is very, very important to understand, and we need to obviously inquire more in depth these mechanisms, okay? For many, many years, we strongly believe that this is a long-term solution. Probably not, okay? This is my personal point of view, but it's something, food of thought.
Okay, Julia, you wanted to jump in?
saw somewhere, and I don't know why, but I think it's a very interesting hypothesis. I saw a bit of evidence somewhere a while ago that somewhere that poverty, that entrepreneurship may be most powerful to get people out of poverty as a second job. So it may be that, you know, that we need to be quite skeptical about entrepreneurship working for people who are living in the most dire poverty, because there's just such enormous resource and market problems that they're facing, right? Maybe they can create social value, maybe there can be communal value, maybe there can be some sort of human value in it, and also generational, you know, may lead to generations in the future. I'm quite skeptical about large scale escaping from poverty from that context, if I'm honest. But I think that people who have perhaps insecure work and supplement that with entrepreneurship, usually from a family or a community business. So our unit of analysis is probably wrong here. We're talking about individuals, and most entrepreneurship doesn't happen by individuals. It happens in families in particular, but also in communities, in collectives of different forms. That maybe entrepreneurship as part of a mixed household strategy is part of, you know, because it offsets the risks, employment creates certain resources, it creates certain networks, you know, and you know, lots of people are doing seasonal work. So, you know, our very unit of analysis, our very approach to what even is entrepreneurship may need to be reconsidered because of this range of context in which it's actually embedded in people's real lived experience.
We just have a few minutes left, but Sasha raises an interesting question in the chat, and I want to take it broader. But the question ends from Sasha: what evidence do we have? And as Julia pointed out earlier, there's a shocking lack of evidence about most of these questions. But the question that's asked has to do with the relationship between pursuing entrepreneurship and one's well-being or happiness. And I'd like to extend the question to community effects. So let's start with Lavoio, if it's okay. Lavoio, if somebody starts a business, do you see much benefit in the neighborhood or in the community, benefit beyond the venture itself or the individual themselves? And to Sasha's question, their own well-being or happiness?
I mean, like, I think you put it on your slides earlier that what COVID have done is kind of reverse all the gains that were there before. So, I mean, before COVID, I mean, there were kind of a shift in some entrepreneurs where the communities were buy-in, they were proud, they were feeling that they have to buy in locally to make sure that the entrepreneurs, I mean, are progressive now. It's still there. People are still feeling proud association, but you've got other forces are coming in now with unemployment, with the poverty, with crime. So crime becomes an enemy now for many of these businesses to extent that they can get robbed now because they've been seen as a target where there's cash that they can able to take in now, where now they becomes an extortion, or I mean, they have to pay a fee to be protected by criminals because they see opportunity. And because of many young people, they don't find job, they see crime as a way, and they kind of like targeting the local businesses in terms of that regard now. So you kind of like get that there's a, I mean, side that we need to promote and we need to support as much as support. And that's one part. And but two, as I'm kind of talking about the sparks that are coming in now.
We just
carry so much weight. Oh, you lost me. Oh,
you're back.
Yeah. So I was saying that I was talking about the sparks that we need to support sparks. I mean, we have these successes, but the load that they carry in now in the community, because everyone comes from resources, support. So you have to become a psychologist, you have a mentor, a guidance, while still running your businesses now. It becomes like so much load in terms of the entrepreneur who reside in that area. So it kind of becomes like a space where entrepreneurs, that the resilience become much more stronger to make sure that with all of these forces that are coming in now, you supersede now because they still part of the, and opportunities. So it's a mixed bag of the problems, that there's a huge interest and the support and the feeling of proudness and support, but also there's a forces that are coming in now who wants to destroy all what's been built.
If I could just play on that a little bit more, Lavoyo, one of the phenomena I've seen, and I don't know if you've seen it, the rest of you, we always talk about the fear of failure, but I see a fear of success. I see entrepreneurs who eke out a bit of an existence with a venture, but they're afraid to do the things to grow. They're afraid to do the things to expand. They fear success in the sense that they don't want to lose the gains they've already made. Is that something that you see?
I mean, like it could be many ways because of the social, structural problem that comes in now, because the success beyond what they know, they cannot imagine because of not being exposed in that regard. So, I mean, so it could be a way where that the possibilities of that success beyond what they achieve, it could be one. But it could be the entrepreneurs themselves. As much as they success, they become enemies from themselves because they're kind of afraid to grow. It could be a situation of you don't want to attract so much. You are comfortable with where you are because you can live and you can kind of survive. So also others, the kind of like a sounding board or coaching or mentorship that takes them beyond what they have, because what we have done is going to take you to the next level now. So it becomes like that support for the next part, which part of the program, like ISA program, becomes much more important, because they kind of like now shape and challenge the entrepreneurs to think with the exposure and also the environment and also the poverty they are sitting in that makes them to be comfortable where they are.
We're down on time, but I wanted to ask all of you, I know you have inputs on some of these other questions, but given the complex nature of poverty, what innovative change would you make to ecosystems to give the poor a better shot? Julia, as you inspired that question, do you have a...
I'm going to narrow it down by talking about women for a minute. So I would, first of all, set up enterprise programs to have a much more long-term view and relationship with the people that we're working with, so that we overcome this danger that we have this lovely, pretty startup story that we don't follow through and see the risks that person is encountering as time goes on. And so that, and not just a volunteer mentor, because we can get into a bit of magical thinking about what these volunteer mentors can achieve in a context of scarce resources and no training and not much incentive to stick around when things get tough. The mentor doesn't always even understand the life world of the poor person. So I'd build much longer term. I tried to get people to start businesses together, whether that be within the family or within the community, get a group of cleaners to start a cleaning business together. And I would set it up much more as a capability and learning process with a route out. So going back to Ernesto's point, I think we need a business exit service and not just a business entry service. When it's not working out, people need to stop pouring, affordable loss comes into here. So they need to stop pouring more good money after bad and to realize when it's time to get out. But equally, you and I and Michael had an interesting conversation about how people can suffer depression or not as a result of failure. And maybe that's contextual, maybe in the States, they're a bit more forgiving about failure than they are in the UK. But have experienced young people who are very isolated by this point. They think they're the only ones failing. And, they're pouring good money after bad, the failure costs are getting deeper. And then their families are looking at them, and all the legitimacy they gained, they crash. And actually their mental health suffers quite badly, as well as getting into debt. So I would build programs that were resilient against that stayed with people, and by building learning and capability and helping them to manage the financial risks that they're taking, as well as perhaps trying to open up markets. So if they were opening a cleaning business together, I would see, can the local council give them a contract? So, to work in a much more rounded way, to think about a resource accrual pathway that whether business succeeds or fails, we have a positive outcome. We think that's what enterprise programs do, and I'm not sure that we spend enough on them for them to do that. And we are in a little bit of world of wishful thinking some of the time.
Yeah, I love that. I think the idea of an integrated approach, a holistic approach, but a temporal approach is really critical. Ernesto, I'm going to give you the last word.
Very, very short. My strong recommendation after working with some communities here in Latin America is try to work with them, from them, okay? And don't try to impose our traditional entrepreneurial behavior, models, literature, and so on, because for many of these communities, the way that they understand a standard well-being or a good manner to have a potential jobs, etc., could be completely different, okay? So if we want to help them, we need to understand pretty well the entire conceptualization, their cultures, the way that they believe, etc., and this is something that is important. And merge and have the good things from our conceptualization, from their conceptualization, and try to create something that add value in general terms and enhance their capabilities to improve and escape out of poverty. And this is the final goal, okay? Not to try to make hundreds of new ventures that create something in pure financial manner, okay? This is my final reflection about that.
Well, thank you all. I think, there's this feeling that we've just barely skimmed the surface, but it's been a fascinating conversation, and thank you for your insights. Thank you for our audience for attending. We will have a video available for folks that would like to see this in the future. And this is the first webinar by the Global Partnership for Poverty and Entrepreneurship. We will make this a regular thing, so we will have future such events. And please encourage those that you know to contact me if you'd like to join the Global Partnership for Poverty and Entrepreneurship. Thanks to everybody, and a friendly farewell.